And our mission for this deep dive, for you listening, is to uncover how a country with just a staggering number of livestock somehow has a largely underdeveloped meat industry. And, we want to explore the massive untapped potential it holds for the global market.
Because it really is massive. I mean, livestock isn't just some side gig in Pakistan.
Right.
It is the absolute economic backbone for millions of people.
Yeah, exactly. Okay, let's unpack this, because looking at this industry is kind of like, it's like opening the hood of a massive, roaring economic engine, right?
I like that analogy.
Yeah, like millions of people rely on it every single day for their pure survival. But very few outsiders actually understand how the belts and gears run.
No, they really don't. And to grasp the sheer scale of it, we have to look at the footprint this leaves on the country.
Let's hear the numbers.
Okay, so looking at statistics from 2020, the livestock sector alone contributes over 60% to Pakistan's overall agricultural output.
Wow, over 60.
Yeah, 60.6% to be exact. And it makes up almost 12% of the entire national GDP.
That is just huge.
It is. But the human element is what makes those numbers really tangible, I think. Over 42% of the country's total labor force is absorbed by this sector.
Wait, 42% of the entire labor force?
Yep. That is roughly 30 to 35 million people.
35 million people.
Just waking up every morning, directly engaged in rearing animals.
That's wild.
And, these aren't massive automated mega farms like you might see in the American Midwest or like parts of Europe.
Right.
This is a highly fragmented, hyper-local network. You're talking about millions of individual rural families, and each one is managing just a handful of animals, maybe 2 or 3 cows or buffaloes, literally in their own backyards.
Okay, so collectively, that decentralized network is managing just a staggering herd.
Oh, yeah.
I mean, the sources mention nearly 50 million cattle.
49.6 million.
Right. And then over 41 million buffaloes. And if you throw in goats and sheep, that's nearly 80 million goats alone.
Yeah, the raw biomass is just colossal.
Colossal. And when you look at the meat production output, beef is just the undisputed king.
Absolutely.
Out of roughly 4.2 million tons of meat produced around 2017-2018, beef accounted for over 2.1 million tons.
Yeah, it completely dwarfs mutton and poultry.
But here's where it gets really interesting.
Yep.
Despite churning out 2 million tons of beef, the average person in Pakistan consumes only about 19 kilograms of meat per year.
Right, which is so low when you compare it to, say, the United States.
Yeah, the U.S. ranks 4th globally for beef consumption. Right?
Exactly. The average American eats over 100 pounds of beef per year compared to that 19 kilograms in Pakistan.
So why the huge gap?
Well, the discrepancy isn't just about, wealth or dietary preferences. It's actually rooted in the fundamental genetics and the life cycle of the animals themselves.
Okay.
Because in places like the US or Argentina or Uruguay, beef production is a highly specialized, really intentional process. They raise specific beef breeds, your Angus, your Hereford.
Right, the breeds that are genetically optimized over generations to just do one thing, which is convert feed into high-quality muscle and marbling.
Exactly. But Pakistan operates on a completely different paradigm. They have 0 dedicated beef breeds.
Wait, 0?
0. Like they have these world-class, highly prized local breeds, like the Red Sindhi and Sahiwal cows, or the Neeli Ravi and Kundi buffaloes.
Right.
And these are incredibly resilient animals, adapted to extreme heat and harsh environments. But they are prized and reared primarily for milk production and draft work.
Draft work, meaning like pulling carts, plowing fields, powering water pumps. The really heavy, grueling physical labor that keeps a rural farm running.
Exactly. So what's fascinating here is that these animals live incredibly long, really laborious lives.
Yeah.
Their biology is completely tuned for endurance and milk yield, not meat quality. And they are only sent to the slaughterhouse when they reach the absolute end of their utility.
So they're only culled when they're too old to work.
Right. Or their milk production has permanently dried up. Or, honestly, sometimes when they've developed chronic diseases that the farmers simply cannot afford to treat anymore.
Man, it's essentially like using a fleet of retired school buses to run a high-stakes Formula One race.
That is exactly what it's like.
You're demanding premium output from an asset that has already spent its whole life doing a completely different job.
Yep.
I mean, by the time that animal becomes beef, its body has to be exhausted. The muscle fibers are probably incredibly dense from years of plowing, and I'm guessing the fat distribution is virtually non-existent.
It is. The physiological state of the animal dictates everything about the final product.
Right.
So because the meat comes from these end-of-life draft animals, the baseline quality is severely compromised.
That makes total sense.
And it requires entirely different culinary techniques, long, slow cooking, really heavy spices, pressure cookers, just to make the meat palatable.
Just to chew it.
Exactly.
Yeah.
But beyond texture, there is a severe public health implication here too.
Oh, sure.
When a system relies on culling animals that are potentially chronically diseased, you naturally elevate the risk of zoonotic diseases entering the food supply.
Right. Those are the pathogens that can jump directly from the animal tissue to the humans handling it or consuming it.
Yes, exactly.
Which means the journey from the farm to the table is just fraught with risk.
Very much so.
And when you trace how that meat actually moves through the local market, the sheer chaos of the supply chain really starts to come into focus.
Oh, the supply chain is, it's wild.
So you have 30 million farmers raising these animals for milk and labor. Eventually, the animal ages out. The farmer needs to extract that final bit of capital from the animal, so what actually happens next?
Well, that animal enters a highly informal, fiercely complex web of middlemen.
Okay.
The rural farmer rarely has direct access to an urban slaughterhouse. Instead, they usually sell to a village-level aggregator.
An aggregator.
Yeah, and that guy pulls a few animals together and sells them to a regional transporter.
Got it.
The transporter loads them onto trucks, which are often completely unsuited for livestock transport, by the way, and drives them to major urban centers.
And I imagine during that transit, the animals are stressed, they're getting bruised, they're probably losing weight.
Oh, constantly. It's what the industry calls shrinkage.
Shrinkage?
Yeah, so the meat quality degrades even further before it even reaches the city limits.
Wow.
Then the animal is sold to a wholesale broker who finally sells it to the local butcher, and every single middleman in that chain takes a cut.
So by the time the butcher buys the animal, their margins have to be razor thin.
Exactly. It is a low input, low output cycle. And you have to understand, the vast majority of this meat is sold strictly on a fresh meat basis.
Fresh meat, meaning?
Meaning the animal is slaughtered at dawn, the meat is hung up on hooks in the open air at the butcher shop, and consumers buy it to cook that exact same day. There are very few chilled meat establishments.
Just hanging in the open air.
Yeah. And the physical infrastructure supporting this is almost non-existent. Roughly 80% of slaughtering is done entirely outside of official slaughterhouses.
Wait, 80%?
80%.
That is staggering.
It's happening in empty lots, behind butcher shops, literally in the streets.
Wow.
And even within the official channels, the animal quarantine department only has a handful of private sector slaughterhouses registered in the entire country.
How many is a handful?
We're talking about maybe 11 facilities.
Okay.
11 facilities equipped to handle modern processing.
For nearly 50 million cattle.
Yes.
That is insane.
The lack of infrastructure is glaring. But the craziest part is that it's actively sustained by the regulatory environment.
What do you mean?
Well, district authorities step in and mandate a fixed retail price for beef and mutton.
Oh, a price cap.
Yep. The government sets a hard cap on what a butcher can charge the consumer per kilogram, and that's entirely consumer-oriented. It completely ignores the quality of the meat.
Okay, wait. If I'm a farmer and I actually want to invest in better feed or veterinary care or modern husbandry, why would I bother?
Right.
If the government caps my price at the exact same level as the guy selling tough meat from a sick 15-year-old draft cow, there's literally zero financial incentive to produce a better product.
You've hit the nail on the head.
I mean, I'd just be burning money.
It is a massive disincentive. I mean, from the government's perspective, the primary objective is preventing starvation and maintaining social stability, right? In a developing economy with a huge population, basic protein needs to remain affordable for the lowest income brackets. But the unintended consequence, as you just pointed out, is an absolute freeze on quality improvement.
It guarantees mediocrity.
Yes, it creates an economic trap.
Yeah.
Because there is no premium paid for quality. No one invests in quality.
Right.
The farmer doesn't buy premium feed. The middleman crowds the trucks to save on gas. And the butcher mixes good cuts with offal to maintain their margins under that fixed price.
It's just a race to the bottom.
And when you add in the total absence of a cold chain, zero packaging, and zero grading standards, the industry is just paralyzed.
Right. And you mentioned the cold chain. That is a massive piece of this puzzle that, honestly, most of you listening probably just take for granted.
Oh, absolutely.
Because a cold chain isn't just a refrigerator at the supermarket. It is a continuous, unbroken, temperature-controlled supply chain. The moment the animal is slaughtered, the carcass has to be blast chilled to halt bacterial growth. It has to be processed in a climate-controlled room, transported in a refrigerated truck, and then stored in a chilled display case.
And in Pakistan's fresh meat market, that cold chain literally does not exist. The meat is at ambient temperature from the moment of slaughter to the moment it hits the frying pan.
Wow. But from what the sources say, that ambient open-air model is beginning to crack, right? Under the weight of shifting consumer demands.
Yes, it is. The major urban centers are undergoing a rapid socioeconomic transformation. You have a rising middle class, faster, busier lifestyles, and a huge surge in nutritional awareness.
So the modern urban consumer is looking at that piece of meat hanging in the dust and the heat at the local butcher, and they're saying no thanks.
Exactly. Their expectations are changing. They want hygienic processing, traceable origins, and the convenience of frozen, ready-to-eat products.
So the domestic market is definitely demanding modernization. But even that domestic shift is just a tiny ripple compared to the absolute tsunami of economic opportunity waiting at the international borders.
Oh, without a doubt.
This is where the story shifts from a localized agricultural bottleneck to a massive global play.
Because if we connect this to the bigger picture, there is a global halal market out there that is experiencing exponential growth. It's estimated to cross $3 trillion in total value.
3 trillion.
Yeah. And the meat sector alone, within that halal market, accounts for roughly $600 billion.
600 billion, that is just staggering.
And it's really crucial to understand that halal meat is no longer just a niche requirement for Muslim-majority countries.
Right.
It is increasingly sought after by non-Muslims in Europe and Asia who associate halal certification with rigorous hygiene, ethical slaughtering, and strict traceability. It's really becoming a global benchmark for food safety.
Which means geopolitically and culturally, Pakistan should be an absolute titan in this space.
It should be.
I mean, it is a Muslim state. The halal slaughtering method, zabeh, is already built right into its cultural DNA.
Yep.
It possesses 100 million large animals. The raw materials are all sitting right there.
Right there.
Yet, despite having every natural advantage currently, Pakistan exports less than 0.6% of its meat production.
It's wild.
They are capturing less than 1% of a $600 billion market.
Yeah. And the barrier to entry for that international market isn't about having the animals, it's about proving the safety of the supply chain.
Right.
International buyers demand pristine cold chains, stringent veterinary inspections, and certified disease-free zones.
So we have the raw numbers, we have the built-in halal advantage, and we even have government projects backed by the Asian Development Bank, according to the report.
Right.
But practically speaking, how does an industry actually jump from a chaotic street-level butcher system to supplying a highly regulated $600 billion international market? Is it just about building a few abattoirs, or is it a total cultural shift?
It's an entire supply chain overhaul. The strategic roadmap involves a massive, multi-tiered infrastructure pivot.
Okay, what does that look like?
Well, the most immediate physical requirement they mentioned is the urgent need for at least 10 massive, modern abattoirs strategically located in the top 10 largest cities across the country.
Okay.
And those need to be supported by a network of smaller mini slaughterhouses in peripheral regions.
So establishing massive, centralized processing hubs, but an abattoir is just a building, right?
Right.
It doesn't solve the problem of the raw material itself. How do they address the fact that the cows arriving at these shiny new abattoirs are still exhausted 15-year-old draft animals?
Well, that requires a total pivot in genetics and husbandry. And that is arguably the hardest part of the equation.
I bet.
You have to transition farmers away from relying entirely on draft animals and start rearing specific herds purely for beef.
But do they have the breeds for that?
They actually do. They possess local breeds capable of making this leap. The Thari cow, for instance, is native to the region and demonstrates excellent potential for rapid weight gain if it's fed properly.
Okay, so they don't even need to import expensive foreign Angus cattle. They have the genetic base right there.
They do, but unlocking it requires widespread implementation of artificial insemination programs, selective breeding, and entirely new feeding regimes.
Wow.
And, crucial point here, you have to protect those new valuable herds from the diseases circulating in the general population.
Right.
This is where the concept of disease-free zones becomes so critical.
Which is basically geofencing an entire agricultural region.
Precisely. You have to isolate a specific geographical area, rigorously vaccinate every single animal inside it, and strictly control the movement of livestock across its borders.
No uncertified animals can enter.
Right. Water sources must be monitored. And for a country where herding is often nomadic and farms are deeply fragmented, creating and policing a true disease-free zone is just a monumental administrative and logistical challenge.
It requires a level of strict veterinary supervision that touches every single step of the animal's life.
Yes.
But if they can achieve that isolation, if they can prove their herds are healthy, they don't just unlock the meat market. The sources mentioned there are incredibly lucrative byproducts that are currently just being squandered.
Oh, definitely. Leather is a prime example of that.
Right.
The hides of these animals are a highly traded commodity globally. But because of the chaotic transport systems, all the bruising we talked about, and the informal slaughtering methods, the hides are frequently damaged.
So they lose value.
Exactly. So integrating modern leather tanning units directly into the supply chain of these new abattoirs could generate massive secondary revenue streams. It transforms a survival-based rural tradition into a calibrated, export-oriented commercial enterprise.
You are talking about rewiring the economic backbone of 30 million people.
Yeah.
Moving from a system where a farmer sells an old cow to a middleman for quick cash, to a system of specialized genetics, quality certification, cold chains, and international compliance.
It's a completely different world.
So, what does this all mean? Learning all this, it fundamentally changes the way you look at a simple cut of meat.
It really does.
Because it isn't just food, it is the final product of an incredibly complex, interconnected socioeconomic web. We've seen how Pakistan's massive livestock sector is the lifeblood of its rural economy, and the stark reality of how beef is produced as a byproduct rather than a primary goal.
Yeah.
And we've seen that tantalizing $600 billion global halal market waiting just out of reach due to infrastructure and pricing hurdles. But hovering above this vision of a modernized future is a tension that we really want to leave you with today.
Because this raises an important question. A shift of this magnitude always comes with a cost.
Yeah.
And it often impacts the most vulnerable elements of the existing ecosystem.
Absolutely. Because when you look closely at the reality of those 30 million rural farmers, there is a hyper-local, completely circular economy at play. The sources mentioned early on that in these villages, the animals provide milk and labor, yes. But even the waste is absolutely vital. The dung excreted by these millions of cattle is actively collected, dried, and utilized.
Yeah, it supplies the primary cooking fuel for countless households that lack access to gas or electricity.
Exactly. And it acts as a critical, free soil fertilizer for their crops. Literally nothing goes to waste.
It is a closed-loop system of survival.
It is. So here's something for you to mull over. If Pakistan successfully modernizes its beef industry, if this master plan actually succeeds and the industry transitions away from millions of family-owned, multi-purpose animals living in backyards and consolidates into highly commercialized, disease-free zones, feeding massive, centralized abattoirs, what happens to that hyper-local circular economy? In the race to capture a $600 billion global export market, does modernization inevitably mean sacrificing a deeply ingrained, perfectly sustainable, rural way of life? It is a profound tension between sweeping economic progress and the preservation of microscopic ecosystem. And we invite you to explore that dynamic on your own. Until next time, thanks for joining us on The Deep Dive.